what we're going to do now is we're going to jump over here and let's go and check out some properties here that have sold recently, and let's discuss some tax sale rentals here.
So what we're going to do is, like we talked about, is we're going to be looking at a couple of different states here. We're going to be looking at uh, Texas, we're going to be looking at Florida, and we're going to be looking at some New York homes. And what we were talking about with our members before is you go through stage 3 due diligence. We really kind of set our max bid, and within class 4 and 5, that's kind of what we're going to be looking at tonight, are class 4 and 5 homes that are going to be at the topper tier homes, and we're going to go through and break down each one of the deals.
Yeah, so essentially, this can be properties valued over 100,000. In most cases here, 100,000 plus, or somewhere right in that range. In a lot of cases, too, these properties, in fact, sometimes you have properties that are not necessarily highly valued, but they bring in a lot of rent. In fact, in some cases, properties are more impressive for the rent potential they have than even their value. A lot of properties bring in more rent than their value would really justify. All these properties, though, have great rental potential here and were picked up for very low percentages of value as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, this one was ended up picked up for 42,000. Uh, quite aggressive on the bids. Now, doing the on-site evaluation, we can see newer roof, newer siding. You know, really overall, a pretty good deal. Uh, Especially as we break it down a little bit more. So, here's where we're located. You can see that we're kind of in a subdivision within here. You know, the Redfin is valued at about 121,000. What was kind of interesting though is this is the pretty much the exact same home. This home has a little garage like there. The only difference is you've got this full porch instead of just that, the kind of that front porch on the other one, and it sold for 150. So, kind of looking at it, this is definitely one where it's already pretty clean, but you could do some extra things to it and probably, beef it up, or you could just rent it as is.
Yeah, which I mean, really, just the way it is, right now, you could rent it out and probably do really well. If you wanted to try to increase the value or get some more money out of it, you certainly could. But at 42,000, they have picked it up for under a third of value. We could say. I mean, in fact, it's probably somewhere right in that range. It might have even paid closer to 25% of value. And what that means is just that this property has the potential to bring in $1,300 a month in rent. And so they've automatically walked into, equity of 80 to 100,000 with how much they paid for the property. But it has the potential to bring in upwards of $15,000 a year, which is pretty good rental, income considering they only paid 42,000 for a total.
Yeah, well, it's going to pay itself off in about 2.5 years. So let's say that there's extra cost. Maybe it pays it off within 3 years. This is a business that you pay, 42,000 into, or let's say we're into it 50, and it pays itself off within 3 years, and you make an extra $16,000 a year. Let's say there's less expense. You're still making 13 or $14,000 a year that's going directly into your pocket. You do that 5 or 10 times. Now you're bringing in some serious income, and we can look at some. There's going to be some properties that even have higher amount, but this is still a home that's going to pay itself off within just a few years.
Yeah, anytime you have properties that could be rented out
Oh
there
shoot.
for any short period of time like that, I mean, anything under 5 or 10 years is pretty crazy, at least compared to most real estate investments. And when it gets down to where it's just 2 years or 2.5 years, that it really it just shows how much income potential these properties have compared to their value. So even though they didn't pay very much, this property has the ability to bring in a lot of money.
Yeah, here's another one. This is built in 2012. It's nothing fancy, but it's on a nice big 2 acre lot. And, they're valued at about 116,000, and they ended up picking it up for 27,000.
Yeah, so again, they paid less than 25% of value for it. And you know, at that low of a price point, it's going to pay off very quickly because properties, even any home out there, is going to rent out for somewhere close to $1,000 a month or more. And even in this case, it would be no different. And so a property like this would have its, the ability to pay itself off here pretty quickly because again, you've only paid 25,000 for it, but the value is there, enough to justify well, actually, even for what they paid, there's other things you could do there with the equity in the property as well if you wanted to cash out on something like that. But just with just buying it and setting it up for renters would be a good plan on a property like this because, it has the potential to bring in so much income.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and you could add on to it. There's a lot of things you could do for it. It's very, very simple now, but it's new. It's pretty new. It's within 10 years old. Everything looks like, it doesn't look like somebody's living there full time. Maybe this was a summer home or something like that. So they paid 27,000 for it. It's valued between 115 to 125. So they have equity. They've earned about 85 to 95,000 on it. It brings in about $1,500 a month, so it'll bring in about $18,000 a year. And this one will actually pay off itself within a year and a half or a year, 1.5 years.
Yeah, that's shockingly short. Yeah, yeah. Normally, when you're looking at these, the fact that it could pay itself off in that time is it just shows they paid a very low price, percentage of value for a property that has the potential. I mean, it can rent out for 1,500 a month. They only paid 25, 27 for it. That's just that's remarkable.
Well, and you're not, I mean, I'd rather put in $27,000 into something like this versus putting in $27,000 into a $100,000 home that was built in 1910. you know, Unless it's
Mhm.
got some serious renovation, this is going to be simple. If they picked it up, that they could, if they wanted to, just flip it. They could probably flip it and double their money pretty quickly, even selling it as is. But if you're looking for a rental income, this rents out for pretty decent, especially versus what they actually ended up paying for it.
Yeah, I mean, really, in almost every case, if there's a way that you could, just keep the property and start renting it out, you'd be better off hanging on to it long term, just because, you could have it paid off here pretty quickly, or basically have your money recovered and still have it coming in there, every single month. This is another great example here, or at least the kind of property that we really like. They even paid up a little bit for it, but at 70,000, it still is a bargain here for compared to what they got.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's big too, and especially if we're talking about a manufactured home. It's over 2,000 square feet. It's 3 bedroom, 2 bath, built in 2010. It also looks like it has a foundation. In fact, this is a property that we went over with our coaching students, a month or so ago, and talked to them again about it last night. In fact, some of these were, that we had talked about before, and then kind of looking through the results. Now, obviously, it needs to have some things done to it. I don't. We don't. We're kind of guessing maybe it's sat vacant for a little while. There's no door there. You can see some back stairs there, and a foundation as well. But really, it's newer. It built in 2010. Very easy to spruce up this if you wanted to use it as a rental or to flip. By adding and beautifying this would really help in reselling it or using it as a rental as well.
Yeah, I mean, even just if you were to invest $10,000 towards the landscaping on this property, it would totally transform it. Is that another picture of it?
Yeah, this is one where they value it about 250,000. And you can kind of see, I mean, we're looking at it here in winter, so it's going to
Yeah.
look about as bleak
w-
as it can.
Well, and that's also a winter after it's been sitting vacant. Like the image that we saw there with the grass, it looked like it was being cut, and kind of like kept down at a low level. And maybe it's grown up a bit since then.
Yeah, but I mean, this could be some photo from when they tried selling it, or it was purchased years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
Oh,
In
they were
any
trying to
case,
look at that though. They were trying to sell it in 2024.
oh yeah, for
Again, or
120.
2024. But, I mean, as far as conditions concerned, this is something I'm willing to, to take a bet on, even at 70,000, worth 250. It's on a nice big 3-acre lot.
And it looks like it may the reason we think it may have sat vacant for a time is because it doesn't have things like stairs there on the outside of the property, and the windows don't seem to have any kind of covering over them. Some of the windows appear to still be new. So we're not exactly sure what's happened with the living situation here on the property, but everything on it should be new enough, that the property shouldn't have too many major problems. But that's part of what we would kind of look into with it is a little bit what's going on with the history here of the property, like kind of like what Steve's doing right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's been sit vacant since, kind of the end of 2024 when it was listed. That's kind of my assumption. Maybe it's been a year and a half, but it does look like there's not been any damage to it. You don't see any type of issue. In fact, even kind of looking at the stairway going up to the front door, it looks like I was mentioning this yesterday. It doesn't look like the wood, it still looks like the wood's kind of still fresh. But here's kind of the breakdown of it. You know, uh, Picked it up for 70, value between 250 to 260. That means that they've earned equity into it. Now we're not, of course, we've got to take rehab cost and anything like that out of it, but 180 to $190,000 to begin with. Rental income, it brings in over $2,600 a month. So a year, that's going to be, $31,000. And so even in this case, it's going to pay itself off in just over 2 years.
Yeah, well, and even if let's say that you needed to sink some money into the property to fix it up, even with another 30,000 into it, it wouldn't extend how long it took. Those numbers that it might go from 2.2 years to 3 point something here, but it wouldn't be that long of a time period here for a property that's bringing in nearly $3,000 a month in income. It's just a tremendous income potential here with this property. Plus, they're into it, for a very low amount and would have a lot of equity in it. Yeah, this property would work out great. And a lot of these properties like this, the value of the properties here in these classes is just that this one property can bring in more rent, than three of your class one properties or a couple of your class two properties. So it's just fewer properties there to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, well, and people get a lot better photos than you normally would. And so people are willing to pay a little bit more, but even looking at, each one of these, they're good deals with good profit margins that are paying themselves off within a few years. And like Shade said, even if you put in 50 or $60,000 to rehabbing it, what does that take it to 3.5 years? And you already going to have 150, $130,000 in equity into it to begin with. Here's another one. In fact, they ended up bidding up on it. Built in 1993. It's 4 bedroom, 2 bath. Sold for 170,000. But even in breaking up the numbers, I was kind of interested in breaking up the numbers on this one because did they get a good deal or not? They definitely paid a lot for it.
Yeah, I mean, from the numbers that we can see, so they paid 170,000 on it. According to the county, they valued it at how much? Like, let's see.
295, I believe.
Like 295. And so, yeah, it would appear, that they paid maybe overpaid for it, at least compared to what we would at those numbers. But the numbers are probably a little bit better than that. I mean, we can see here they're estimating it at about 357. And if that's the case, they basically paid about 50% of value for it. And it's not really a bad deal considering the fact that there's still quite a bit of profitability in this. They have the potential here to probably earn in excess of 150,000 on it. And the property looks like it's fairly usable, just like it is. So they may not need to invest much of anything into the property in order to resell it. And they're basically buying a ready to use property at that price point they're at.
Yeah, in fact, when I went and Googled over top of it just to check the distance, and it seemed like it was bigger than what they're putting right here at 2,100. But you can see it's really nice. It's currently being lived in. Got a sunroom here. A big huge yard. So it makes sense in why they ended up paying, what they did for it, especially as we kind of break down the numbers a little more. This one's going to take, you know, under 5 years to pay off. So it's going to take more, but it's still, there's $190,000 worth of equity into it. So let's say that they put another 40 or 50 in, maybe another 15 to do the roof, another 15 or 20 to redo the interior paint, carpet. Even in that case, you're still picking it up with a huge amount of equity in a home, where you're not going to be able to do that type of deal any other way than through something like a tax sale.
Yeah, no, this is a big property, that they paid 50% for or under 50% for, which I don't think there's really any other way that you could get the property at this low of a price point. Even in a lot of other things like if it was in some kind of a mortgage sale or something, I think it would sell for a higher percentage than that because it is in pretty good shape. But yeah, the rent potential on this property of $3,000 a month, it can bring in a tremendous amount of revenue. And for a lot of people, that could be, a person's retirement plan here. A deal or two like these properties could bring in enough money to keep you, to basically pay the bills and yeah, it wouldn't take very many of these types of deals in order to do that. Plus, they've got a ton of equity in it. They basically are able to kind of double up their money on it. So as you rent it out, you also have time to fix title issues if you want without being in a rush to do that. And so when it does kind of turn to sell a property, you're selling it for full value. You're not discounting it because you have a clouded title. You have an insurable title at that point.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This one here, what did it ended up selling for? 60,000. You can see that it was built in 1958. It's obviously had a rehab since then. They're assessing it at 158,000. It's also on a big lot. It has 10 acres.
Also has some acreage. When we're looking at a property like this, we can tell from the images that it's been more cared for. It has a new roof on it. It has, it looks like the windows are new. It has that attached garage here. All of that stuff looks like it's functional and new. And I think if we were digging more into the pictures, we could even see that it wasn't that long ago here the property was occupied. If it's not occupied now, I don't know.
Yeah, in
Um,
fact, this is one that we talked to our coaching students about, because one thing that was interesting is you can see that they've got a little piece of deeded property over here next to the lake, because this is across from the lake, and so that kind of allows them to have a boat dock or anything that they want. And this lot was probably done a long time ago, where it also gave them access to be able to get water, or use it in that section as well. So you've got a big 10-acre piece here, with an addition to being accessed on the water. And then, like Shade said, you can see that it's been upgraded, new roof, new siding, new windows. It's definitely had some type of major, rehab within probably the last 10 years.
Yeah, which that's going to limit how much work is going to need to go into the property, in order to make it nice and usable. So, that would justify paying a little bit higher percentage for it, but they still picked it up at a pretty good price. I mean, at 60%, sorry, $60,000, they are into this property less than a third. So they paid about 30% of value. I'm kind of guessing here, but it basically still leaves over $100,000 in potential profit that they could make on this property. If they were to turn around and sell it.
Well, and one thing that's interesting is a lot of this land has been was currently farmed, which means that, you may be able to automatically buy it and have a good portion of this bring in residual income, as well through farming. You can see how they did quite a bit of it. You could probably even move some of this stuff and have them kind of farm this whole area here. And that may be, I don't know how much that would bring in an extra year. I don't know enough about that, but what could be $5,000, maybe more, maybe less. I'm not quite sure, but that could be an additional income source, because it's obvious that they were currently farming it right now.
Yeah, well, and the one thing that it could do is it could cover something like property taxes, for the year. So rather than that coming out of your pocket, it's basically, could be covered by somebody that's working the land. That's something you could potentially do. And anytime you have acreage like that, there's that potential there for use and the ability to lease it out or rent it out there to somebody. Especially, yeah, anytime like if we see that the property is active farmland, then there's an active use or a use for it. That's kind of the main thing that we're looking for is to see if the property has a specific use, that can be monetized. And with farmland, it's pretty clear and easy for us to see.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Here's kind of breaking down the numbers. They ended up paying 60,000, valued at 195. So they've got about $135,000 in equity or so. It rents out for almost $1,900 a month, which would come out to 22,800. So in about little over 2.5 years, this property would pay for itself, and that doesn't include, let's say that you can bring in an extra, you know, an extra 3 or 4 grand a year in income from the farmland. That could even increase it to where it pays it off within 2 years.
Yeah, I think these types of deals are remarkable just because you're not paying very much for these properties that have tremendous income potential. And a lot of these properties also look like they're pretty close to being ready to use right now. Like most of the properties we've looked at look like they, could be used right now. Like, I wouldn't think that there's too much going on because I think most of these properties have been occupied fairly recently.
Yeah, I just was looking at some of the questions, comments. Dan was talking about how pasture lease is an option. It's absolutely good money in hay. And so all of those are additional options on a piece of land like this, where you've got both land you're leasing and you're also renting it out as well. And there's a lot of people who are looking for exactly a property like this, where it's not too far from town, but they have their own acreage. Maybe it's 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, quiet. And so there, even though there's a lot of renters that are looking for a property just like that, that may want to get out from the city a bit.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, in many cases here, we can look into the rental markets for these areas if we want to get an idea of what's going on or what's currently available. Oh, this property here is another just amazing deal. This is one where it's picked up for probably a lower price than it could be picked up just about anywhere at here compared to what it is. This property is humongous. So they did pay a lot. I mean, they paid 325,000 for it, which, I mean, that's a lot of money. But as we get more of the details here about the property, and it was built in 2011, it's 6,300 square feet. So it is huge. I don't know how it's only a 3 bedroom, 3 bath house. At 6,000 square feet, it's got to have a lot of rooms that are dedicated to something in there because that's just a lot of square footage to not have more bedrooms than that. But as you look at the property, you can see it's a big house, and the value on the property also kind of substantiates that as well. They paid 325, but the value of this property is closer to what do we find out? 800,000.
Yeah, yeah, 879,000. You can see it's right here. I mean, we'll look at it here a little more. One thing that was interesting as well is that off here to the left-hand side, it looks like to me that could be I don't know, maybe it's a shed, but you've got the front in there. I almost wonder if it could be like a mother-in-law apartment or something like that, a little apartment. But yeah, I think there's definitely probably more than 3 bedrooms in it. But you can see, they're valuing it at $879,000. We can see where it's located right here. You're kind of, New York on this side, Vermont on this side.
Yeah, you're basically, is that ocean access or was it lake? What are we looking at there?
I actually don't even know myself. I should look that up.
Well, if you scroll out far enough, does it show? I mean, does it touch the ocean anywhere here? How far inland are we?
No, it's in.
Oh, I see. I see. It's inland quite a
Yeah, I mean
ways.
it's closer to Vermont, and it's up here at the top part of New York. So it's some lake. I can't remember if Lake Champlain. Champlain. Yeah,
Interesting.
right there. I don't know why I was blanking that.
Yeah,
But
that's a nice property, and I mean, basically, there's almost $500,000 in potential profitability in this house.
yeah, yeah, I mean, really kind of a cool location. I was looking at some of the things around it, and breaking down the numbers, you can see they paid 325, worth about 880. So there's over $500,000 in potential equity, in this deal. So sure they paid up for it, but this is one of those top tier properties that they still picked up for less than 50 cents on the dollar. And there's possibility to make over $500,000 on this deal. So yeah, it's going to take some money to get up to a deal like this, but you can see that it rents out for, almost $4,200 a month.
Yeah, that's a lot of you're talking about $50,000 a year is what it's renting out at. That's uh, it's a considerable amount of income here for a property to be able to bring in. I mean, sure, they paid $300,000 for it, but that is yeah, that's a tremendous amount of monthly revenue.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's going to pay itself off in, 6.5 years. But even in that, we're talking about, at that point, you're going to be, it's probably going to be worth nearly $1 million, and you own it outright. And that's where you can really create wealth is as you get into these class 4, class 5 homes. Make sure that you're picking up the best type. This would be a great example of one where, even if it takes 6.5 years, you have that much equity in that property, in essentially something that's been paid off. Or you could take a loan against it and go buy more. I mean, there's just so many options when you're looking at this where you can get creative with it as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be a pretty easy way to turn 325,000 into $1 million. I mean, that if you were to just hang on to it for a few years here as you rented the place out and lived in it, it probably would go up to that $1 million mark.
Yeah, this one's kind of interesting. We talked about this one a little while ago, but this is in Miami, pretty competitive market. We can see that it's a condo here. It ended up selling for 70,000, so it sold for quite a bit. And I wanted to kind of see what the numbers were on something like this, and if it would make sense. You can see it's located right here. Here is essentially what it rents out at. In fact, let me grab another link.
That rents out for $2,500 a month. It's only 360 square feet. That's crazy.
Yeah, and here's one that's just like it is for sale next to it. So, they're selling for about 160 to 180. And they're renting out for $2,500 a month. So yes, they paid up for it. It's only, I mean, it isn't. It's in this Sunny Isle Beach, just I think it's south or it could be north of Miami. So it's a uh, small home, and you can get kind of small condo, and you can kind of look and see what they look like. All of the floor plans are the same on this model. It's but even in breaking down the numbers of this, it's going to pay for itself pretty quickly. And even though
How much do they pay for it here again? This one?
they paid 70 grand.
So 70,000 and it's valued like 180.
Yeah.
And what's nice about that is that with it being kind of a condo, we don't have some of those risks, that we face with just regular homes, where at least we know certain things about the property should be good, like the structure. And at that limited space at 360 square feet, like you could do a rehab on the property for nothing. It wouldn't cost much at any. I mean, it's really there's $100,000+ in this deal, just based on what they purchased it for, even paying up. And that's out of Florida. That's in a pretty competitive market. And they're still, they bought this property for about 40% of value, and they paid a pretty low percentage of value on it, which is why it has the ability to pay itself off there in such a short time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, let's say it's only worth 170. Well, there still could be $100,000 worth of profit. You're talking about
It-
something that can't have that much damage to it. In fact, it could be perfectly great. It could be ready to flip right now, just changing the doing some paint or some minor stuff on it, and it's going to pay itself off in less than 2.5 years. So there's homes, but there's things that you can look at like this, and maybe you look at doing, it as a short-term rental. Maybe you can look at doing a long-term rental. There's a lot of different options when you're looking at something like this, and this is in a very competitive market.
Yeah, as competitive as they get, really. In Florida, Miami area there, and so that's a great deal. In an area there that's highly competitive, still that's going to be a good win and $100,000+ in potential profit.
Yeah, yeah. This next one is this home right here. Ended up getting picked up for 120,000. They say it's worth 195,000. Look a little more into it. But this is actually one that's worth quite a bit more. This is where research becomes so important. It's the reason we talk about the 3 stages of due diligence. We can see that it's located right here. In fact, this whole area is just going crazy right now. So, you're kind of looking, okay, it looks like an older home. But if we look down here, these are all newer homes. These are all newer homes.
Well, they're brand new constructions. Like basically, what's happening is either they're building on new lots, or they're tearing down old homes and building brand new homes there. Which is something you don't see very often.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in fact, we talked about this, I think, when we were talking about Florida, this one, but I kind of wanted to break down the numbers and see what they would be, looking a little bit more into it. So, this isn't what this is what it sold for at the auction. We know it sold for 120,000. They're only estimating it at 306,000. But when you really look into the market, that's where you can kind of see where the value. But even at 300,000, that would still be a good deal at 120,000. But here's a home that's just as old, same size, built in the 70s like that one, pretty much the same floor plan. Sold for 520. Here's kind of even an older one. This one was built in 55, and it sold for 450,000. And really it's kind of basic to a degree. I mean, they even have the old tile and stuff still. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Well,
the wood
and
looks good, but
what we're probably looking at here too. So this is the Pensacola area, and I think these are properties that are right there close to Pensacola Beach. And so you've got a location thing going on here where you've got a lot of people, that want to move into this area, and it's driving the value of land up here dramatically, and it's also driving up the value of regular homes. That's part of the reason why Zillow can say, the home looks like it's valued at I don't know what they had listed there, around 300,000, I think you were saying. Uh,
yeah. But look
but
at
then,
the mission.
yeah, but
They're missing information on it.
yeah, they're missing data, and we can see that the properties, the other comps around it, similar comps around it, have sold for prices ranging from 490 to 500 plus thousand. And so there is a lot of potential profit in this property. This could be one that would be uh, one, or maybe you fix up a property like this, somebody sinks some money into it. This is one where you could sink some money into a rehab, be into it 200,000, and have a property that can sell for five something.
Well, and if you look at this one sold for 450,000, and you really look into it, I mean, it's a nice job, but they all they really did was paint. This is all the old original tile, blue sink, blue toilet. This is all the old original woodwork. So this isn't stuff that they put into it. You look at the kitchen; those are the original cabinets. They just painted them. Those are all the original cabinets. We even look at the windows, and those are all the original windows on it. So yeah, I mean, it looks nice inside, but it really is it's not like they put in a huge amount of cash into even kind of rehabbing it. They updated it, but they kept everything that they could original, and it still sold for 450,000. So, and it's 20 years older. So there's a lot of things that you could do with this home, and bring it up into closer to this type of price range. and then they have all of these new homes that are selling, for 600 to 800,000.
Yeah, and by the way, Sam, so what we're doing with this is we're not getting into the weeds here in terms of all the details here about every little expense that's going to be included on it. What we're mostly trying to point out is the percentages that people are paying versus the income potential that the property has. So really, even if we were to add up things like repairs to this or other taxes, insurance, things would be added, it would add a little bit of time here to to what it took somebody to pay before it essentially paid itself off, but it wouldn't add that much time. So yeah, more than anything though, it's about what we're kind of focusing on with this, which more than anything is just trying to focus on the potential that these properties have for income, versus how much the people are paying, for the properties here, and just how quickly they could, that income potential, could basically replace what they already have into the property. That's kind of the main thing I think we're trying to cover with it.
Yeah, well, and exactly. I mean, let's say that you're putting in another 50,000 or 100,000. That may take it from, let's say we put 150,000 on a property like this. Well, it's going to take it from maybe, you know, 4 years to 6 years or to 7 years. But still, you're getting into this for as cheap as possible. I mean, even this, we just took the $300,000 price point. So we're kind of leaving out $150,000 in even in this breakdown. So that still leaves them 190,000 and only 300,000, and there's not a home in the entire area that sold for 300,000. This is by far the cheapest. The cheapest properties I found were the two that I just showed you, that I used as examples that sold close to it. So, in this case, this by the time you rehab, it'll probably bring in closer to $3,000 a month. And so even if you're into the equity on it, $120,000, $130,000, it only 300,000 or any of these different deals, you're still getting it for as cheap as you can, and it's going to pay itself off in a short period of time. I mean, this is a business that you can invest into, and you're going to start getting returns on it immediately, and within a few years, all of these deals under 10 years, the property is going to be completely paid for, using it as a rental.
Yeah, this one is an interesting market here. In fact, I think we saw a piece of land there. In fact, we saw a piece of land there that was selling for a crazy amount, like $300,000 for a building lot in the area. Oh, is that it?
Yeah, yeah, this is just right, it's on the block over, homes over here. Oh, no, I think it's over on this side. But yeah, this lot is the exact same size that sold for 305,000. And then there was a little lot, tiny little 5,000 square foot lot. I don't even know if it was buildable, that sold for like 160.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, this, if we were to kind of zone in within this area, you can see kind of how hot this is, and this is kind of something that we'll do as we're looking into different markets, is get an idea of what's currently on the market, what's sold. And then from here you can go back a year. So just here in this little area, there's been 208 properties, and this is just a less than a square mile. And then we can see how many are for sale. There's currently 60 for sale.
Holy cow. So yeah, I mean, they basically have 3 months worth of inventory, available right now. It means they're turning stuff over really quickly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This older home there. There's a newer home. That's an older home as well at 489,000. So this whole area, property values are going up, and so picking it up at 120,000 doesn't matter. You know, I mean, in this case, because the property value is so high, even if we have to go and do the roof, we have to repaint everything. We take this. You could. There's so much money, in the cost in the putting up these new homes, that you could refresh in this home, add anything you add to it smartly, you're going to be making up when you turn around and resell it.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think that they're selling the same piece of land for more
Yeah.
money almost. I mean, they're selling it for, I mean, almost the same amount of money for just a vacant piece of land that's right next door. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah. Well, and there might have been a old home on here that somebody tore off and and made it into a lot that they sold for 300,000. So that's where I think that this was actually going to make them a lot more money in the long run, especially how they approach it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Also, another Florida deal and kind of a deal incognito where you might look at that normally and say, oh, well, maybe they're going to be able to double up their money. But yeah, looking into the market there, that is interesting. There is a lot more potential money in that market.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This next one here's in Texas, sold again for 120,000. Got a bunch that sold right there at that 120,000. You can see it's in the Dallas area. It's this home right here, valued at around 270,000.
Those are good numbers again too, and also in a pretty competitive market. I mean, Texas is. This was through an online auction, in Dallas County, which has sales every single month, and so I would say that it's as competitive as any market, in Texas. So to get the properties there at 120 versus, the value that it's at, uh, they didn't quite. Well, let's see, what did they pay? About 40%, maybe not quite a third of value here on it, but more like 40% or so. And that's a pretty good number, at least uh, for this area here, to pay 120,000 for the property here like this. And it has potential here to probably even bring in more.
Yeah, well, I think every one of these you could use as a rental, but these could be used as flip deals as well. I mean, let's say they pick this up for 120,000. There's worth $150,000 worth of equity if they sold it for 270,000. Let's say they put $50,000 into rehab, and that's still making 100 grand on the deal. I mean, if you were to go through and look at each one of these 190,000, let's say they put in $90,000 and they only sell it for 310, there's still $100,000 in this deal. This is probably the smallest one, but even here you could probably get nearly $100,000 for each one of these deals. This one here, you've got the chance to make $500,000. So we're looking at kind of the rental side of it now, but each one of these could be great flips as well that could be easily done as a flip. Look at this last one and I'll throw it over. Been going through them for a bit here, but here is another one in Florida. We wanted to show you a couple of different markets of Texas, excuse me. That last one was in Texas and Dallas. This one here is kind of interesting. Can't remember if we looked at it with our members before. We looked with, but it's
Yeah, it's a nice house.
yeah. In fact, really kind of for as big and huge and grand as it looks, it really doesn't have that high of a value as far as what they're assessing it. I'd be interesting to see what it would appraise for after you rehabbed it. Because I mean,
How
look
much did
how
they pay
big
for it?
they paid 127,000 for it.
So they paid 127, and even on Zillow, they were saying it's worth three something.
339. I just I have to think that if you were to do something with this, it could be worth more than that. I mean, it's right there on the river. It's a big, beautiful home.
Well, there are some newer images somewhere here too. Maybe it's here where they have there's some construction work that they've done. There's like a back room that where the wall looks like it's been taken out, and they've been involved with some level of construction. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple $100,000 in potential equity, and that's if the value is only at 339. It is, I mean, it's 5,200 square feet, and when was it built?
It was built in 1970. I mean, you'd really need to look into kind of the market value. We'll kind of go over the numbers, and this is just kind of doing a quick gloss on it. This isn't really getting into it, but I would think that this is such a big and unique property. I mean, with the big, all of that woodwork, there's just so much money that was put into this big, huge fireplace, and it could be redone to look look modern and and kind of classy. So I
It's just never been remodeled since 1970, basically. It's kind of original to 1970, and so it would probably be a fairly big remodel job, but at the end of it, the value on it might be pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, and it was just kind of fun to look at the numbers. I mean, this one is the one that I would be the most worried about. I mean, we need to really, if we were buying it, we need to make sure that the value's there, unless we were just going to, you know, flip it quick to try to sell it for 200 and make 75 grand on it, because this is a major project. All of these ones here have been pretty easy, as far as what needs to be done with them. Some of them maybe very little. This is one that would be a big project, but it's interesting to kind of look at the numbers. Brings in $3,700 a month, about $45,000 a year. So, if you were looking without the rehab cost, it would pay itself off in 2.8 years. But you may need to, put $150,000 into it, and maybe that would increase. You have to really see what the market would be and what it would be valued after you really rehabbed it, and how unique or somebody would want it within that area.
Yeah, yeah, we could look at some after repair properties there. They're kind of the same age and get some idea.
And you've got a fairly decent sized little city here, so kind of interesting.